Ready? Okay. Here we go. Alrighty, so classification or taxonomy, they're both used for the same thing, is the science of grouping organisms based on similarities the first scientist to try to do classification was named Carolus Linnaeus, and he's over here. Sorry, he's kind of far away. He was around in like the 1600s. And his job, need more time? Sorry, I heard a sound. Okay, everyone good?
I wouldn't know working at all.
One moment, okay. Yeah, so basically Carolus Linnaeus was this scientist. He was around a super long time ago. He was the first person who was like, hey, we should try to put these organisms into groups so that it's easier for us to talk about them and to see similarities between them. And it's just a good idea for us to do that. So how do you think that he probably sorted the organisms?
Well, by how they look.
Exactly, like straight up by how they look. This is a time when like microscopic organisms were not really a thing. Like there wasn't a way to like see deep down into layers of stuff. All of that sort of things. So I'm gonna go over here, we're gonna talk about Carolus. He was the first scientist to attempt to organize organisms into groups. He did this based on how they look, and what he could see was only two different groups of things. What do you think they were? Say it louder. A good guess. No, though, but good guess. Exactly. Animals and plants. And he was like, woohoo, I'm done. Sorted. Cha-ching. But it was like, actually, no. You missed a lot, and no. He had like the mushrooms with the plants, all that stuff, which like, you know, you could see how that would happen. But this was also all based on how they looked. Okay. Totally based on how they looked. Okay. Cool. So now hopefully you're aware that like, that's not what we do now. We have more high-tech ways to sort animals into groups that aren't just like plants or animals. Okay. If you want to type, if that would be better, you can. Okay. So coming back over here to talk about the levels of classification. You might have in middle school heard of these, and you had maybe like an acronym to remember them, and it was like a long thing about how to remember the orders. Yes, no, maybe. No. King Philip came over for good soup. Okay, maybe, I don't know. But this is the order of how things are classified. Kingdoms are really, and species are really specific. So up at the top, this is like very general. This is very specific. That's why it's actually called a species, because it's so specific. So as you go down, you're getting into like smaller and smaller and smaller groups, where eventually in a species, you only are going to have one thing in that group. So this is kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and oops, species. And then actually above kingdom, there's another level, and that's called domain. There are 3 of them. Anyone know what they are? Want to guess?
Is it plants, animals, and birds?
That is kingdoms, and we'll get to them in a second. So even bigger.
Water, land, and sky.
Yeah, good, Ross. So it's eukarya, and then it's actually the bacteria are split into archaea, which are like the most ancient bacteria that are similar to like the first living things on Earth that live in like crazy places. And then the other ones are called eubacteria or just bacteria. But EU means true. So they're like the true bacteria that aren't like living crazy lives in crazy places. So these are the 3 domains. And then what we really focus on for the most part in here is eukarya. So in eukarya, there are some kingdoms, and we'll name those now. So I'll say in eukarya, ... The kingdoms are, anyone want to name me some of them? You can yell them.
Fungi.
Good. Usually that one is one of the last ones. Not yet, too specific. Plants. And these are sometimes written in Latin. So sometimes you'll see plante. It's the same thing. Okay, what else?
Animals.
Animals. Which are called in Latin. And then we're missing a group. Protists. Or protista. And then bacteria is also considered a kingdom, but it's not one that's in eukarya, so I'm going to leave it off. But bacteria is considered to be both a domain and a kingdom. So I'll just put that over here. That 5 would be bacteria. And also same thing with archaea. So sometimes you'll hear people say that there are 6 kingdoms of life, and that's what they are. Okay, so then if we're thinking about phylums, I'll talk about which one, what we are. So we're in kingdom, the animal kingdom, humans. And then our phylum is called chordates, which means we have a spinal cord. All the vertebrates are in chordates. And then in classes, we'll do animal classes, because why not? Now, Ava. Nope. Mammals. Yep. So the classes of animals that we're with are mammals. And then the other classes on our level that are vertebrates, you know what they are? Good. Amphibians. Reptiles. Birds. They are actually they are a class, but they're in a different phylum than us. They're in arthropods. And arthropods is actually the most diverse animal phylum. It's way more diverse than chordates, which people are always like, there's so many mammals and most animals are mammals, and they're not. They're mostly insects. There's like, I think like 80% of all animals are insects, which is crazy, but true. I feel like I'm missing an animal class. Am I missing one? Fish. Yep, missing one. So those are the animal classes of vertebrates. Okay. And then you get more and more specific as you go down. Eventually, we get to genus and species, which they're important. So I'm going to talk about them. Anyone know why they're important? Together? No? They're used for scientific names. So used. And we have another section about scientific names that I'm going to go back up to in just a second. But basically, like at some point, I don't know which scientist was like this, but they were like, we need to have a way to like talk about these things in every language. Because if I was a scientist and I like went to Asia and was in a country where they didn't speak English and they had a different name for the same animal, it wouldn't make sense for me to talk about it with them. But if you use their scientific name, which is always in Latin, it's easy for me to go to like an ant lab somewhere else and talk about this species of ant with the scientific name. Everyone understands now. So let us go. Oh, well, wait, before I go any further, what did you guys say for your definitions of species? Anyone want to share theirs on their thing, the document we did? It was the last question. Go ahead, Martha.
There was a specific population.
Yes, that's a great one. So the most like, I guess, scientific description of what a species is a group of animals or plants or whatever that can mate and produce viable, fertile offspring.
What's viable?
I'm going to tell you. And this is called the biological species concept. Literally what this means is that if you have two animals and they are able to mate with each other and they produce an offspring that survives, that's what viable means. Can survive. So like the offspring is born and it doesn't like, it's not like weak or unable to survive. Fertile means that the offspring is able to reproduce. So what this means is that someone put this on their questions from the last one, the last video we did, but horses and donkeys can mate. What do they produce? Mules. Can mules reproduce? You know that? They cannot. Mules are infertile. Yes. So what that means is that even though the horse and the donkey could mate, they produced a viable offspring. It was a mule. Because the mule is infertile, it can't mate. Horses and donkeys are separate species. Same thing is true about lions and tigers. Lions and tigers can mate. It produces a liger. For real, it really does. Ligers are infertile, so they are not the same species. Okay. There are other species concepts because when's a time for organisms that biological species concept wouldn't work? Like it wouldn't help you figure anything out. Can you think of one? Would biological species concept work on bacteria? No, why not?
Because they don't reproduce.
They don't mate.
You
So
now have 5 minutes to get to your first class.
it doesn't work. And that means you have to look at a different species concept. So for bacteria, they actually classify them by their shape instead of using this species concept. But there you go. Okay, scientific names. Scientific names are always Latin, always 2 words, the words are the genus plus the species. Genus always is written first. They are always italicized if you're typing. And the genus is capitalized. Species is not. Okay, so examples. Obviously, I can't write in italics, so I'm not going to do that. But if I was typing, I would italicize them. Humans, you know what we are? Yeah, good. We're Homo sapiens. Which were actually named that because of our large brain size, because like sapien is related to like knowing. So our genus is Homo. Our species, which actually that should be a little s, is sapiens. There are actually other organisms no longer living that are in the same genus as us, like Neanderthals were in the same genus as us. Dogs, anyone know dogs, what they are?
Venus.
They are Canis familiaris. Actually, all dogs are the same species, technically. Different breeds are just like different characteristics that have become more common. Which is crazy to think about that, but that's true. And wolves are really closely related to dogs. Anyone know what they are?
Venus.
Yeah, good.
Oh, so is that why it's like they're familiar to them?
They're familiar to us, to humans. That's why we named them that. Because it's like, those are our friends. We like them. And wolves are not. Which actually, this is, if you're a Harry Potter fan, this is why the werewolf professor is named Ben, because he's a wolf. Surprise. Okay. Okay, guys, we have one more thing that I need to teach you today, which if you go down to your next page, does anyone have any questions right now about this?
Reach to the top. My OneNote wasn't working a minute ago.
Yes, definitely. Right here? Or somewhere else?
Yeah, there.
Okay, the next page down, guys, called Keys and Trees. That's the last thing we're gonna do today. Logan, tell me when you're good. So
You show the
now
green part too.
here. Okay, so what we just talked about, guys, was like how scientists would classify organisms. Now we're going to talk about like if you're a regular person just like hanging around and scientists have made these tools for you to like see how organisms are classified. How do you understand them? Like, how do you read them? And they're called phylogenetic trees and dichotomous keys, or if you're me, keys and trees. Logan, are you good?
Okay, yeah, I'm good.
Hey, okay. All right, so keys and trees, here we go. Have you ever seen a picture that looks like this? No, okay. This is called a phylogenetic tree or a cladogram. I went ahead and wrote the definition in there for you. They're diagrams that show the relatedness of organisms as well as like when they showed up in history, okay? There's different layouts. All of these layouts say the same thing. So I'm going to talk about that. How this works is down here, every time there's like a branch point, that's a common ancestor. So this spot right here would be the common ancestor of all of the organisms.
At this time, all students should be in their next period class. At this time,
Okay, same thing here. Same thing here. This, whatever was here is like the common ancestor of them all. Okay. Organisms that have more ancestors in common are more closely related. So based off of this, A and B are more closely related than A and E. Because A and B have more common ancestors. They're closer together, right? Makes sense? Okay. So also the points where they like intersect like this is called a node. You could rotate the entire thing and it would still be the same. Like you could put D on the top, or you could flip B and A and it would still be the same, still mean the same thing, okay? Usually what you see is you will see different traits marked on the cladogram. Organisms that have the traits will be after the trait is marked. So I'm gonna actually use, I'll use the middle one for this. So let's say that right here is where, we'll say backbone. Okay. So all of a sudden, it becomes very clear that A, B, C, and D all have backbones. Does E? No, because backbones evolved after E split. So they don't have one, okay? Now let's say here that this is lungs. Okay. We'll put here, this is gills. Okay, now A and B have lungs, C and D don't. They have gills. Okay, then if I put a mark that's literally just on A, that means only A would have that. Maybe it's wings. Okay, so none of the other organisms have wings, only A does. Okay, making sense so far? The other thing that this shows is the passage of time. So if you look over here on this one that's going horizontally, on the left would be the past, going here would be the present. On the one that's going up and down here would be the past, going forward would be the present. That's the same on this one that's kind of slanty, same deal. You can also show if an organism is no longer living. So let's say I'm going to take my white pen and I'm going to mark out C, and I'm going to shorten C's line. And now I'm going to say that that's C. What does this show now? It's extinct. Yeah. So now this is showing that C went extinct because its line doesn't reach the present. Okay. So like maybe C is like a pterodactyl and D is a lizard. Okay. They would both have scales. So you could put here like scales. And that would work. Maybe backbone here. And then A and B would be things that don't have scales. Maybe they have hair. So they're mammals. Okay. So basically just paying attention to everything that's after the trait hash mark has that trait. And then also paying attention to who's the most closely related, which means their branches are the closest. They have a more recent common ancestor. Make sense? It's not too bad. So this is a tree or cladogram. This is what our practice is going to be on today. Really quick, I just want to show you dichotomous key before we move on. And that is over here. Oh, this is a cladogram, actually. Let's look at this real quick. You're going to do this. So sometimes when you're making a cladogram, you use a character table. And that helps you figure out which organisms are more in common and which are less in common. The organisms that have the least traits are the simplest, right? We call them primitive. So I'm going to put that here. The primitive means that it's the oldest, simplest. And that also means, I don't think that's how you spell simplest. I'm going to say most simple. And it also is the most similar to the ancestor. It's also called an outgroup. So in this cladogram, which organism is the most primitive? The lancelet, which is a jawless fish, if you were wondering. It's basically, it has a backbone, but it's like doesn't have jaws. You know it's the most primitive because it doesn't have any of the traits. And if you look at the character table, here's the lancelet. It doesn't have any of the traits at all. So when you draw the tree, I like these slanty ones better than the ones that are like more lines. You can decide which one you like. But when you draw it, I always start with a shape like this and a shape like this. Whatever is your outgroup goes first. And then you add in the traits going up the tree. Okay, so you add it in like, this will be your next one. This will be whatever trait it has that the other one didn't, which for the lamprey is the vertebra column. Are you guys seeing that? Does it make sense? Okay, and then I just keep adding them in all the way till the end. Whatever's here, this is the most recent / complex, which means that it will have all the traits. Okay, this will be trait, 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 trait. So it's a lot more complicated because it has all of the traits. Cool? Cool. Okay, actually, I'm not going to do dichotomous keys today because I want you guys to have time to do the practice. So we're going to skip that. But we're going to go to the page that says cladogram practice. If you want to work together on this, you are very welcome to. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to draw yourself a cladogram after you make your little matrix. You're going to have to Google whether the organisms like have these things or not. Okay. Also, I should mention this, that derived characters are shared traits. It's just another way to say that. Okay. Okay, you have the rest of class to work on this. You should be able to finish. You have 20 minutes and you are free to go. Zoom, thanks. Have a great break.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.